It's the Lekker Rugby Pod, only on Megaphone Rugby.
Episode 62 of the Lekker Rugby Pod. I'm sitting in the Strand in Cape Town. Harry wishes with all he's got that he could be here, but he's not. Sorry, Harry. I'm in your
How's it,
backyard
MV?
at the moment. Yeah, welcome.
You're trying to find some players so you can make them bulls, bring them up like Andre
Mm,
Pollard and then
yeah.
pretend that they're bulls.
Jake's my best friend now. He sent me down to do some scouting. Yeah, I was at the Varsity
There
Cup
you
game,
go.
as you know. Got a lot of players lined up. They're all signed up in my back pocket. No players for you guys in the next 10 years. All going to Victoria.
We got some great comments on your channel, people weighing in, commenting, in the articles that I write on the different forums and then on places like YouTube channel. It's really amazing. If you read the comments, you either think you're the best analyst who's changing the world forever for the better, unlocking deep, dark, mystical secrets of rugby that no one else has discovered, or that you're the biggest doers in the world, that your head is up your arse, that you are a bigot, that you are insane and an imbecile. And there's kind of nothing in between. It's kind of weird because I think it's probably the truth is more in between those two. But if you read comments, you can start to love yourself and hate yourself at the same time.
Yeah, that one comment I enjoyed just is, I don't know if I can trust your bona fides or something like that. I said, oh my word. All right, let's leave it there. We are a South African channel, first and foremost, guys. We know we've got more non-South African viewers than we have South African viewers, but the point is we are South African supporters. We love the Springboks. On that subject, Harry, you wrote an article about the Roy. You just mentioned writing articles about the Lions composition of possible team. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. Also, but also in this video, you and I are going to talk about why did we put together a Southern Hemisphere team to go visit them over there? Apply the thinking that the Lions are using to get a team to play together without all the cohesion and all the fancy stuff and still work. We're going to talk about that later in the video. So let's talk about that article of yours first, the Lions. Who do you think the Lions are going to be? Who's going to go on tour? What it's going to look like? What the thinking is going to be behind it? Tell me about that article specifically. Why did you write it in the first place?
Yeah, well, one of the reasons why I like to write articles on forums that have vigorous comment sections. So I've got 400 comments to that article, 11,000 reads, in just a couple of days. So you can gauge level of interest, but also you get immediate feedback on whether you're a good writer or you are illiterate or the dumbest writer in the world. And I like that. And I don't take things personally, as you know by now that about me.
I do.
I'm confident in my writing ability enough where I think it's interesting and funny sometimes. But you, there's a lot of interest in picking a composite team. And I was thinking about that. And it kind of applies at every level. At every level, you're picking a Lions team. If you're picking, you have four teams at under 14, under 15, under 16. Basically, when you get to the first team, what's happened is a coach has sat down and said, okay, so where are my weaknesses, where are my strengths, who's my best players, who's my worst players, and done it. And it just replicates itself at every single level. We think, when you get to the top of the ERC or Super Rugby, or you get to the top of the top 14, surely all those teams are just as good as test teams. It's not really true unless you're able, like Toulouse and Leinster, to literally pick a test team and then pick the best available guys, or even Leicester. Leicester has a lot of Tigers, have a lot of money, so they can get Andre Pollard, Julio Montoya, and put them in there. And I don't know, they can get like Izzy Paresi from Australia. They can kind of pick, and you learn a lot about what a coach thinks his holes are in his team by who they go out and acquire. And so when you get to the Lions level, British and Irish Lions, it's interesting because you get to see a guy like Andy Farrell, the Irish coach, sort of have truth serum. Like, okay, so I am picking different players than I have at my Irish team. It was quite interesting because he's been a continuous picker guy. It reminds me of this university professor I had. He was really well put together guy, but I noticed pretty quickly that he always had one thing wrong with his outfit. He would have the most amazing jacket and pants and tie, but then just the worst socks. Or he would nail that, and then he would just mess it up with the shoes. And then, even times when he got it all done, he was James Bond, but then the tie, oof, it was so bad. I started commenting to other people in the class about it, and then they all bought in. Everyone was excited. Every day the guy walks in, we're all going, there it is, it's the belt. And so this is what happened, happens to teams, which is on paper, they picked a team, looks pretty good, but they know. They know we got one guy who's going to miss 6 or 7 tackles, the Raymond Rule Award. And the problem at top test level is the teams are good enough to find that guy. So Sam Prendergast, who we love, and we love the skill set and the whip pass and the degree of difficulty of some of his kicks and how hard he tries. Tough guy too for having that build and then going up into a meat grinder. But he missed 18 tackles. 18 tackles in the Six Nations. I mean, they only play 5 games. 18 tackles is what you would expect an entire team. Like the Box would be filthy if they missed 18 tackles in a game. And here you have one player missing that in 5, whatever. He didn't play every game. So, Andy Farrell has to think about that. So some players into the Six Nations sort of flying high. Sam Prendergast, Josh van der Fleer, people like that. And then on the end of the Six Nations, you have Will Stewart and Finn Smith, who have reared up, and so you have to think about doctrines. So what I wrote the Roar article about and got this good response was kind of took a look at how you would pick a Lions team, and you have 3 things to think about up front. Are you good enough relatively to the team you face, the Wallabies, where you don't really worry so much about what could the Wallabies do to us? You just pick your best available on every level. And you almost do it forensically. Like, I want to be the best in scrums. I want to be the best in lineouts. I want to be the best in ruck. I want to be the best in restart. I want to be the best in kick return. I want to be able to score from less than 3 phases, but I also want to be able to score from 5 phases plus. And if you start doing that, the shape of your selection starts to take shape because you have a philosophy. If you don't do that, you end up like Warren Gatland in his Lost Lions. So Warren Gatland's a great coach, but he peaked at the second to last Lions tour in New Zealand. That was his peak. From that point on, whether he was at the Chiefs or Wales or doing his tour of South Africa, he had problems because he was fuzzy on selection. As Jake White always points out, that's the most important thing. It's where you start. It's like it'll doom you if you don't do good selection. So look at Warren Gatland in the 3 tests in South Africa in 2021, that famous, infamous tour. He vacillated. He had Sutherland, Vunipola, Wyn Jones at loosehead. Three tests, 3 different looseheads. Kicks, Sutherland to the bench. Vunipola goes to the bench. It's scrambled. You look at him across 13. He had Elliot Daly, Harris, that's just dropped off the history. No one even knows where he went. And then Henshaw. So at 13, a vital connection all over the place. Bundy Aki only makes his big entrance in the 3rd test. Again, you look at how you want to play at fullback. You have Stuart Hogg kind of falling, maybe a precursor to just his insides, what was going on inside him, and then finally you have Liam Williams. Across the board, you had some incoherence. At 9, he had Price, then he had Murray, then he had Price. So you keep mixing and matching. So I wondered, because I read Warren Gatland's picks and compared them to my picks. So what I came across with for the Lions going to Australia was had Ellis Genge, Dan Sheehan, Will Stewart, Maro Itoje, McCarthy, Big Joe McCarthy at the off-lock next to Itoje, Tyburn. I'm shifting him over to a blind side where I like him better. Tom Curry, a proper pilfer jackal thief. Kalen Doris at 8. Probably Maro Itoje captain. And then the back line, Jameson Gibson Park, Finn Russell, Bundy Aki, and Hugh Jones in the midfield if Sione Tupulotu does not recover. And then you have at wings, I had James Lowe and Tommy Freeman. Warren picked Duhan van der Merwe, and he picked Jack Morgan instead of Tom Curry. And Warren Gatland in the Telegraph wrote that he had Andrew Porter instead of Genge. I don't like Porter at Lucid anymore. I think he leaks too many penalties. He's too well known. And I don't want to, if I'm going to the Wallabies where you should have an upper hand in the scrum, I don't want to give away that, And then for me, Kinghorn, but Kinghorn has a top 14 season to finish. So Keenan would be there ready to go. Whereas Kinghorn, if Toulouse goes deep into the top 14 playoffs, which they should, you might have troubles. The bench is interesting because Luke Cowan-Dickey was there in 2021 as well for the Lions, and he's on my bench. Schoolman, Furlong, Ryan, Morgan, Mitchell, Finn Smith, and Marcus Smith. So you can play around with that, and you look at sort of the continuity factor for Warren Gatland from 2021, which is only 4 years ago. And Maro Itoje stands out as one of the true constants. Tom Curry, one of the true constants, the only two in the pack, actually. And then into the back line, you see Finn Russell, who came on at the end of the third test for Warren Gatland and played really well and made it tight until Mornay Stain buried them. And then beyond that, not much, It's a big turnover with the lines. And so you wonder, people say things like, well, it's a composite team, it's a scratch team. That they put that in the column of what favors the Wallabies. The Wallabies have all been playing in one patch, Super Rugby. They're spread across only, real 3 teams with one and another weaker team. Surely that will help Joe Schmidt. He's had KPI, he's got IP, he's got hands-on. He can go from Brisbane to Melbourne to Sydney to Brisbane and just keep going around and watch. He can visit the practice. Whereas Andy Farrell, has to wed these things together. In reality, that's just kind of people trying to sound smart. It's kind of bullshit. The Lions always do better than the individual parts of their teams. Always. Look at the long history. They played the Boks 49 times, and they've won 18 times. So that's, definitely much more in favor of the Boks. But that record of winning 18, losing 25, and drawing 6 times is way better than the Welsh record in South Africa, than the Scottish record in South Africa, than the Irish or the English. The English has the best, and it's much better. So you're always better off touring with the Lions because you can plug the holes. Also, there's the iron sharpens iron idea, where you get the best players in there and they look across, they say, Maro Itoje looks over at Tyburn. There's a magic to playing with your enemy and how much that kind of excites you. The All Blacks, when the Lions go to play the All Blacks in New Zealand, they've won 7 and lost 30. So, they're minus 300 points. But that's still, it's still exponentially different and better than any of the home nations' records in New Zealand. In Australia, actually, the Lions are winners. So they've won 17 out of 23. The Wallabies have only won 6 matches against the Lions. And every single time the Lions come, they are composite teams coming off 6 nations, battered and bruised. And they have to wed together and match together. And they even have to sometimes make coaching staffs mesh. So this is obviously one where the Lions come in as favorites. And so it's interesting to see what they might do. Once I wrote that article, then, my friend Charlie Morgan from Telegraph in London and a lot of other people kind of weighed in. We kind of chatted about it. And so there's some people that are still on the fringes. You might look at, like I said, Tupulotu, come back from injury. Guys like Darcy Graham, guys like Jack Willis, who plays at Toulouse, who also is well regarded at that crucial Pilford Jackal position. On that, you have Jamie Ritchie, you have Ben Earl, you have Ben Curry. You have a lot of choices to go to and lose forward. Scrum off, it's pretty much Jamison Gibson Park, Alex Mitchell, but then Ben White for Scotland is shaping pretty well. And then I think there's some continuity at hooker. You have Dan Sheehan, Jamie George, Roland Kellner, and Luke Cowan-Dickey are pretty much on everyone's list, and they're all better than the Australian hookers, by the way. And then you have some wild cards. You could look at someone like George Furbank, Elliot Daly, or the currently injured Emmanuel Faye-Waboso. At props, you have Nicky Smith for Wales was one of the bright sparks, and you have guys like Ty Furlong that are coming back from injury. So how do you do that? How do you figure it out? How does Andy Farrell do that? First thing is Andy Farrell has picked all Irish coaches to assist him. So that's our first clue. Warren Gatland in 2021 had Gregor Townsend on the plane, and he had Steve Tandy, the defensive coach for Scotland. And you could see that some of the choices and the almost internal squabbles of selection, they kind of came through as Warren got more nervous after the second test where the Boks got him. Went into the third test, and there was too many changes. You have doubt creep in. So I don't think that's going to happen this time. I don't think Andy Farrell is a man that sits there racked with internal doubts. He's going to have a plan of coherence. But I don't think it's going to be 13 Irish players and then, 5 token English and then maybe a Scot or 2. I don't think it's going to be that way because Andy Farrell is such a smart man about picking players on the national level. He harvests players from Connacht and at times from Ulster, but also from second team Leinster or guys that weren't perceived to be all world class players and makes them better. There are certain physical attributes he looks for in, let's say, a Bundy Aki, where there's things that happen more on a test and a Lions series than they would happen in Six Nations or in the Irk. You're not going to have wide to wide, kick pass to kick pass, home free, hectares of space to run into. And they go, oh, I like that. I want to pick a guy who scorches through the entire team. You're not going to do that at the Lions level. It's going to be very difficult to have line breaks. Even Ireland's game against the Wallabies in Dublin, he can look at that and say the level of pressure at the breakdown that a Fraser McWright can put on you, or the hard carrying of Rob Bellatini, or the athletic skills of a guy like Joseph Akusu Suali'i, you're not going to just run away from them. So that's where the Aussies can kind of catch you, is on athletic ability. I also think that the narrative before the Six Nation was that it was an Irish team, and then you're going to find your holes. Maybe at scrum time, you get an Ellis Genge, Maro Toje, defensive pest and good lineout thief. Maybe you have a player 23 like a Marcus Smith, but it'll be an Irish team. Then the Six Nations happened. England lost to Ireland in the first round, but then they got better every round, beat the French, whereas the French just absolutely mullered Ireland at home. And in every composite team, England did better than Ireland. And they did better specifically at facets like scrum. In the scrum percentage, Ireland was the bottom. In the scrum penalty win-loss, Ireland was the bottom, England the top. In gain line, England the top. In blindside play, in tight play, in turning turnovers into try, England the top, Ireland the bottom. In turning turnovers to try, which is a really big stat, long range tries, basically every single break percentage, which is underlying the win-loss, it was England or France, and then way down was Ireland. And so I don't think you can look at that and say that there's not an effect. Andy Farrell will definitely think that there was an effect of what he saw. And so then you start to wonder, what would it look like if you did the same thing for us? If you kind of went across the hemispheres and you said, and what if Australia wasn't just left on its own? And what if they could gather the best of the Rugby Championship and called themselves the Crocodiles or the Zebras or the Tango Rhinos, the ostrich emus? What would that look like? And that's really cool. It's the stuff of dreams. It's the kind of thing that you wonder about when you're doing a blog or you start to write. You start to think about funny things like that. And I think the fact is, it's like that professor. Everyone has one or two things wrong with their outfit. If they could just fix that one thing, they'd look so dapper. I would think, and I'm eager to hear what you think about this, but I think right now, not 10 years ago, where you'd start with the New Zealand team and then find the holes probably in the pack and stick a Bismarck in or a Bakis in and make it better. I think now you'd start the other way around. You'd say, let's just start with the nucleus of a Springbok team, and then let's just throw our net and see, and who else would we have to think about? And the names that come to mind for me, mostly would be All Blacks. So you start out with you just start with the Springbok team. Just start there, and then you just say, who could I get better and cover a hole by substituting in? And then names like Wallace Satiti, a monster carrier, Artie Savea, a loose forward who has three loose forward skill sets. So I'm not sure they're replacing anyone yet, but just you look at them for a 23 and you go, Wallace Atiti, rising player, junior player of the year, Artie Surveyor, almost always in world player of the year contention. What about Cody Taylor as a hooker? Probably taking Bongi's space. So you'd have Marks and Cody Taylor. Cody Taylor was definitely one of the best forwards in the year last year, and it's something he does, for a decade. Tyrell Lomax at scrum, didn't take a backward step, played 72, 73 minutes. You have guys like Mark Talea, who looks pretty much like a Leckerback if he would put on a scrub cap. Difficult to put down, even in small spaces. And then you have a guy like Will Jordan, just seems to always find a way to score a try. So Will Jordan, Talea, a guy like Jordy Barrett, sort of forces his way into the 23 discussion. Satiti, Cody, Tyrell Lomax. I think that's all you'd go. You might have talked about Damian McKenzie and Bowden Barrett in years past, but I think maybe they're supplanted now by guys like Sasha, Damian, and who seem to be, every much as an excitement machine, but maybe better at converting chances. So right there, you've got, I don't know, like 7 names that squished their way into a 34 squad. From Argentina, Juan Cruz Malia, Chocobares, Pablo Matera is just one of the world's best 3-skill loose forwards. Julio Montoya at hooker also might be your third hooker. We'll get in there. And then I think Guido Petty is an amazing, sort of lock 6 in the sense that he can really mess up your lineouts. He's a one-man wrecking crew. So that's the Argentine contribution. For Australia, in a down period right now, I think Rob Valentini, Fraser McWright, those two guys really can change a breakdown. Fraser McWright he's not a Pocock guy, but he's reminiscent of a person who can turn a game on its head. And better than Josh van der Fleer, for example. Probably better than Tom Curry. He's a guy that can really outplay you on the deck. And that's not something that the Springboks have really had. They've either had Siya Kolisi doing kind of a tram version of that, or Kwagga Smith being undersized version of that. So, if you think about Springbok team, and then you're throwing in a Will Jordan, you're throwing Wallace Atiti, Artie Savea. You've got, a guy like Julio Montoya coming off the bench, and Pablo Matera, and then Fraser McWright. You've covered holes that maybe exist somewhere in your team, and you wonder about that kind of matchup. The Lions always obviously play on the home fields. So they come to New Zealand, they come to South Africa, and they come to Australia. If the Southern Hemisphere Zebras were to go north and play, you'd think it probably wouldn't really shape as well as a tour, because I don't think it'd be that competitive. I think they would probably win a little bit too easily. So you'd have to the Lions would have to form in the north, and it'd have to be the whole thing. And maybe you'd find neutral fields, or maybe you'd stage it at Twickenham. I see that Twickenham is having a big row right now about whether they can make more money from non-rugby events, and RFU is threatening to leave Allianz Twickenham if they don't have a 3-day Beyonce concert. So who knows, but I think rugby has to become inventive. And I know that things coming up on Nations Championship and the All Blacks tours are trying to put some spice back in, but I do think we need to be a little more inventive and creative about the matchups we do. And World 15s and, special events like that is just, it's good. It's good for fans. We used to have best of Southern Hemisphere, best of Northern Hemisphere play sometimes, or sometimes you'd have the best of the world go play against the team. And it was fun. It's not serious. It's just an interesting thing. Creating content is, one of our phrases. Although I got to say, I'm a bit tired sometimes of hearing about people being content creators. Sometimes you're just taking a picture of a hamburger, and like the content creator was the guy who made the hamburger. I'm not sure it's really a guy like Ringo. That's content. Our friend Rian Lowe, he makes real content. Or when I'm trying to write an article for the Roar, I think that's sort of content. But just taking a picture of the the wing of your airplane as you're taking off doesn't make you a content creator, in my opinion.
No, talking about content creation, please go watch the video of John Robbie, which I think was a fantastic interview. I love talking to him. You called him a raconteur. Raconteur. How do you pronounce that?
A raconteur is a guy who, no matter what subject you bring up, and then what a reference, like something about a painting. Oh yeah, and then John Robbie would say, I was really good friends with Pablo Picasso's third wife, and he would have a story about it.
I love it.
And I think that's just hard to find a guy like that.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's you talked about, the untouchables and the things that define a team that you can't really, put your finger on. And John went a long way to explaining that, because he was a lion himself. How did they get them to gel? You talked about the people overestimating the importance of cohesion, for example, and the likes. But there are questions to be asked about cohesion, which I'll ask you just now. But a couple of things I just, from what you said, I wanted to ask you. You talked about Jack Willis, for example. He can't play for England. He's not eligible for England, but is he eligible for the Lions? Just how does that work?
Yeah, Owen Farrell and Jack Willis could get picked. Those are two names that keep cropping up. It'd be a big story if Andy picked his son Owen above someone like, Finn Smith or Marcus Smith. So I don't know how that will play. But Jack Willis, on every metric, on every eyeball test, on every side to side, is one of the most influential players in the top 14, and a highly physical top 14 that goes 26 rounds. And he is a real monster. So I see the point there. However, that's also where the Lions setup right now is kind of the deepest, because you have the Twindaloo twins coming on, the Curry brothers, Josh Van der Fleer, Rory Darge, James Ritchie, Ben Earl, Kalen Doris, Tyburn can play, a loose forward. Yeah, it's just kind of embarrassment of riches. Jack Morgan, you look at his stats of what he hits on defensive rucks and attacking rucks and tackles and carries. It's almost unbelievable that he's able to do that. Just a machine. So I could see Andy Farrell sacrificing the top level ceiling skill of Jack Willis in the service of a more cohesive training camp, playing Argentina, getting across some island training, maybe on the island of Jersey, really hardcore. But I do think Andy Farrell is aligned with me, and I'm aligned with him, obviously, on this idea that there are special players. I think he thinks that. I think that there are places on the field, 10, 7, not South African 7, South African 6, the open sider, a hooker. I think he thinks there are places on the field where if you can put someone there that's hard to prepare for. So against Australia, you pretty much know what you have to do to beat Australia consistently. You can either out Australia, basically be the All Blacks, who is the most practiced in beating Australia. It's the most Australia beating outfit you could possibly imagine at every single level from club up. They're just like, stepbrothers. So they're so close that that's already been told to you. And so the Ireland shape, while it's not really an All Black shape, it's akin to it. It's in the adjacent, All Black adjacent enough where you just go, okay, I'll load up. So if you do that, then you are picking guys like Marcus Smith. Maybe you are doing a Tupeloto, Hugh Jones, super attack midfield. Maybe you're not trying to do as many kick chases as England does. On the other hand, there's a certain level of power deficit that is the safest way to win of all. That's the Lions template is, if I can overpower you and outmuscle you like the French did against Ireland, that's even less risky. It's a better way to win a 3-game series. A 3-game series is attritional. You're playing the same guy again and again and again. I'm a blindsider, you a blindsider. I'm playing you today. In a week, I'm going to play you again. And we're just basically fighting. I mean, like we're playing a game called rugby, and sure, I get it. There's a ref, but we're fighting. Like every single ruck, we're just going into and we have a lot of vengeance and grievances, and you did this, and you caught me in the edge of my eye with your elbow by mistake, but now I'm going to stomp on your foot. Like it's if you have enough bodies to throw in there and we're bigger and we're stronger, you can wear out the Aussies. And that might be the safer way to win. Because if you do wide to wide, you throw quick, you go to the outside, Scotland got to the third receiver more than any other team in the Six Nations. Guess where they finished? Where they always finish, about fourth. Guess the two teams that threw the fewest and were the most box kicking and were the most relentless in barging the ruck, England and France. So, there's a point where you get to higher levels of tension. There's the other part here, though, about trust. So this is why when you look across a team that Warren Gatlin picks fictitiously for this one coming up, who he would pick. And when I was doing mine, I was thinking, so who would Joe Schmidt trust and who would Andy Farrell trust? There is that residual thing. If you talk to Rassie Erasmus right now and you said, hey, Rassie, we're going to be in Australia 2027. There's going to be a closing out scrum, and I need someone to pick it up from the base and then run into, 5 wild dogs and not get stripped or smashed back or turnover tackled. How about Jasper Wiese? I think Rassie would go, okay, sure, let's go. Because I've seen it. I've literally had that problem, that nightmare of retreating scrum, crumbling, got to pick it up, not knock it on and create the second scrum that's going to be an All Black scrum. And so why wouldn't Andy Farrell trust a lot of guys that he's seen in Durban in a street brawl where everyone's getting their arms and legs broken? I think he would. On the other hand, he is English, and he follows the English game very, very closely. And I do think he understands the differences in some of those top levels. Hugo Keenan is a wonderful fullback, but Blair Kinghorn, he just makes breaks for fun. He offloads like 18 times in a Six Nations. He looks like he cannot be stripped. He looks so huge with the ball. He's apparently the quickest player in Scotland, in the Scotland setup. So Andy Farrell has access to those things. Hugo Keenan's no slouch, of course. But my point is, if you have physical attributes, you're playing up against some very lively back three players for the Wallabies. You might have a guy like Joseph Suali who can sky in the air. Maybe you do want a Blair Kinghorn, who's 6'5", super wingspan, and is as quick as anyone the Wallabies can put out there. So this is the fun part. I think coaches almost live for this, sitting around in a room, getting 50 players, and then they go, and now let's cut them down to 39. Who do you lose? Who do you? Lions in the past have always tried to have a player from every country, and sometimes that's been a real issue for Scotland, for example. There have been times when really no Scottish player deserved a pick, and they kind of did anyway. It was just sort of a unwritten rule that the whole idea of the Lions is supposed to be for all. This time around, it's more the Welsh that are on the bubble. Jack Morgan is the only one who's routinely written in, and then Nicky Smith, phenomenal prop, also gets some mention, but that's about it. And both those players could be replaced by someone just as good, really. Morgan probably has the biggest argument as being different, but he's not huge, and it's not altogether clear that he would really fare that well against Fraser McWright and Rob Bellatini, actually. So I'm not sure. I do think this is one of the Lions tours where the Lions do come in the most favored. Australians can yell at me about that or get cross with me. I'm telling you, Australia's ranked about 8th. They celebrated the win over England as if it was the second coming. They won 6 and lost 7. And it was the only real bright spot in win-loss of the whole year. The Lions, even if the Irish have waned a little bit, there's enough quality in England and in Scotland that if you combine those three and really think of it as a 3-part harmony, this seems like a series that if the Lions come and do what Andy Farrell and his Irish coaches drill them to do, they should take care of business.
You talked about the players now and everything, and it makes sense. You've got a better player here and a better player there. The point is, how are they going to play? And I saw Brian O'Driscoll had a lot to say about the fact that Jacques Nienaber ruined Leinster's defence and by extension ruined Ireland's defence. So there's a bit of a blitz of this, and you talked about Steve Borthwick not understanding the blitz, and he's got a sort of hybrid there. And how does Scotland defend? If you're Andy Farrell now, it's one thing to have all the good players at your disposal, but how are you going to play? Number one, how are you going to defend? Which that to me is a more pressing problem than getting the right players in the right places.
Yeah, it's the age-old debate. Do I design my system, my philosophy, and then I find the players to fit into it? Or do I take best available players, sit down and then go, how should these players play, and then fit the system into them? So I think Andy Farrell is a man who knows his own mind. And with all due respect to one of the best players who ever lived, Brian O'Driscoll, I mean, footsack with that argument. That's ridiculous. Jacques Nienaber has turned Leinster into an unbeaten team, mostly built on defensive animosity. I mean, just unbelievable attitude. He's taken a player like Gary Ringrose, who was, missed a lot of the Six Nations, into a premier 13 shooter. Guys like James Ryan, who else talked about this? James Ryan's a good example, always been a good player, but he said, Jacques Nienaber gets more out of me than any coach I've ever been around. My friend Bernard Jackman was talking about how the lift in recycle defense, of fold hold, of the speed to get back into the fray is unparalleled. And it's a very easy comparison to take Leinster a year ago and now. It's we can literally look at exactly the same benchmarking of material, even go back 2 or 3, and then just see what's happened at Leinster, how difficult it is to score a try against Leinster. To somehow lay the blame of Ireland and Easterby in the absence of Farrell and Goodman calling his players stupid, somehow that finds its way back to Nienaber. I'm like, what has Jacques done to get in the line of fire there? If anything, what they should be saying is, if Nienaber had been the defensive coach at Ireland, then that would be interesting, to see what would have been, how much better they would have been. In the battle of defensive coaches, Sean Edwards is the winner, but Jacques Nienaber is not the loser. He wasn't in the tournament, and so you have a drop off there where there was defensive incoherence. I wouldn't think it's more about cohesiveness; it's about coherence. Like, you can take really strong, good players, as the Lions have been doing for 100 years, and they're better than the composite parts. They're better than some of their parts because they have coherence about how to play, but then everyone is just better. You're combining a guy. You're sticking in greats. Alan Wynne-Jones is looking across the scrum and looking at Maro Itoje. It's cool. It's a magic to that. One of them might have grown up thinking, that's one of my idols, and now I'm playing next to him. And so, yeah, I think it's the same thing on a different level that happens at every national test side. When you bring the guys, 15 guys back from Japan, and then you bring the young guys like Cameron Hanekom come in, they look across and they say, wow, this Peter Steph Toy, that's going to make Hanekom play harder. He's just going to lift up a little bit. And if he's not able to get there athletically, then that'll be found out. I mean, the Bok coaches will find him out and go, yeah, you're okay, but you're not really at this level. So same thing's going to happen with the Lions. And Farrell will be I think he's very polite, and I think he's considerate, but I think he's very clear with who's going to be doing what. I don't think this is going to be an incoherent tour. I don't think you're going to have the same problems that you did in 2021 as Lions, where you were always wondering, is Townsend and Gatlin going to war every day and fighting over the system? Because that seemed to be what happened in the third test. By the time the Lions got to the third test in Cape Town, and it was time for, everyone's nuts on the table and walking wounded, everyone's got a long injury list. It just felt like the Bucks knew how they wanted to play when it mattered the most, and the Lions were still trying to find their way. So I think the goal for Farrell is to get the Lions as quickly as possible lined up in how they think, what they do on third phase, how their starter plays work, What is the shape of being skinny or wide, as Andre Pretorius always shows us on defense, the reload, and then crystallize around who his spine is and really like just explain it to everyone and then do it. We had Waratah's fly off on 8-9 combo this week, Tate Edmond. He talked about how Joe Schmidt requires his fly offs. It doesn't matter how many there are. Let's say there are 4: Ben Donaldson, Tate Edmond, Noah Lulasio, and Tom Lainay. They all have to present to the rest of the team the plays once they have got them in their mind. So it's almost like an oral exam in school. You present, and so he's loaded them up. Red combo, Gene Charlie and Alpha Bravo, and you just explain the play, and you have to be vocal about it. You have to be clear about it. This is also going to inform Andy Farrell's choice at 10, the vital one, who's his starting fly off, because he's going to want to have the same setup as Schmidt does, which is he needs, if Finn Russell's the man, Finn Russell's got to be the man. And then whoever's coming on to finish, that person's got to also become the man. I think it's fascinating. I think every rugby fan loves the idea of the Lions. I don't know if every time the Lions tour happens, you wonder, is that the final one? Because there's so many logistics. It's so inconvenient. It jams up every other tournament that whole year. It messes up, it invades the top 14, the precious sanctified top 14. It makes everything weird. Everyone's summer, or their winter tours, the July tours, everyone's tours are all messed up. And so that's part of what they're trying to correct for in the Nations Championship. And so one of the biggest casualties of that might be the Lions tours.
Let's talk about the Southern Zebras quickly before we finish. We talked about different styles, different teams, different everything. Rassie is a master of that. I mean, he's got players playing in Japan. You mentioned before, they play a completely different style of rugby to what the Bulls and the Stormers and the likes playing. The guys playing in England's different to the guys playing in France, yet he brings them together and is able to hold them into Springbok rugby. So that's a good argument for the Southern Zebras, firstly. And secondly, we talked about Jack Willis being eligible for the Lions. Would a player like Richie Mo'unga, for example, be eligible for the Southern Zebras? I suppose he would.
Yeah. That's a good point. I think Richie Mo'unga would be one of the... Actually, that's a very good example. It's probably the best example of someone who's not currently in the All Black setup that would elbow their way in, because he plays proper rugby. I think the All Blacks miss him so much because he's not the caricature of New Zealand rugby the way Damien McKenzie kind of is. Mo'unga plays the right percentages. He's a winner. He's a killer. And he's such a good kicker at poles. He's trustworthy about that. Yeah, that's a good example. I think, the interesting thing about Rassie, what Rassie has to do, and Tony and Jerry and now Felix and Stick, is even the guys who play in Japan, they don't play with each other. I mean, Malcolm Marx plays with, I don't know who he plays with, some All Blacks. Peter Steff plays with a Barrett or two. I mean, like they don't, Arendse and Colby have to shake hands from opposing sides, and you only get, 1 or 2 in each team on the field or starting. So you wouldn't say that the Boks are built around one particular team the way almost every other, like Toulouse forwards, Toulouse decision makers, and Bordeaux backs, with the sprinkling of Toulon. Scotland, obviously, they you can pick from abroad, but it's still basically, a Glasgow spine, and then you have some Edinburgh guys, and then you have guys like Ben White and Ben Russell. Ireland is definitely a Leinster flavor with key elements to fill their holes, but maybe not as well as Geordie and Archie fills them, with Munster and then a tiny bit of Connacht. South Africa is, number 1 world champ back to back, and it's the only one that does something really funky, which is it's not really a Stormer pack per se. We could go back in their roots and say, yeah, they were kind of Western Province guys at youth, but that's all kind of just over time. That's not really your first allegiance, and then there's a bulls aspect of the pack to some degree, but not really. The Sharks have a weird argument to have, maybe the most box, but it still doesn't feel like they're playing shark ball. You go from Sharks to Springboks, and you are playing a completely different kind of rugby. None of the Japanese-based players play enough together where that's really informative about how they're playing. Andre Pollard's over at Leicester Tigers. I mean, it's a very strange setup. I don't know what they're doing in there, but it's working. My theory there is that the cohesion marker guys who want to have a consultancy business and sell to the boards and sell to the teams, overestimate correlation and ignore causation theory. When they talk about cohesion markers, I think it's a bit lazy thinking. I think I could beat your cohesive team if you give me the pick of best ofs. So I'll scoop a Montoya and a Chocobaris, give me a Willis and a Malia, and I'll grab a Mawunga and a Jesse Creel, and I think I could make them better than your super cohesive team, that plays in Kimberley. So I think there's a quality level there. Joe Schmidt is famous for saying that in the non-skill maker decision team positions, just give me the big brute athlete. Just show me big guys. I want big guys who love contact, who keep their eyes open when you punch them and can deliver the counterpunch. People who are impervious to pain, people who have high leaping ability, people who have explosive dynamism in the tackle. You've seen them, like how much coaching did you really have to do to make Mark Talea hard to tackle or Colby to be elusive? I mean, isn't that just sort of wired into them? Isn't the real thing there is picking them, finding them, not saying things like, oh, they're too small, or Emmanuel Miafu is too fat, like someone said in Australia. And now he goes over the front. And he's one of the best players, and he looks very fit and gigantic. So I think, the science of picking that is interesting. I think that's why I kind of like watching the Lions, because they're kind of a real-time science laboratory experiment. One set of data that says, no, it's actually by bringing the best players together. They're really hard to beat. They can go to New Zealand and draw a series, or they can take us down to a Mornay Stain kick. When none of those individual teams was probably going to win a series. You can argue that Ireland did in the end in New Zealand, but it's one time ever. And the Lions, are able to do that better.
Just to finish off with some concerning news about Evan Etzebeth, once again not picked for this weekend. Some strong rumors there about the extent of his concussion injury. What are you hearing there?
Well, so Plumtree's come out and said it was a hamstring that was strained in Springbok alignment training camp. So it's kind of good news, bad news. Bad news, he's got a hamstring. Good news is it apparently wasn't going to be the head that was going to keep him out. He had actually cleared and was on the way back. And like happens to you a lot when you've been on the sideline for a while, then you pull a hamstring. I'm just speculating now. And so I'm just making this up. So don't quote me and don't, say that I've stated this as a fact. That might have been strategic a little bit, because I do think sometimes the national setup can be a little bit more careful about player welfare at times than club level. Who wants to get it back in? Your best player, let's go. I hope in these cases, and I always advocate for this, whether it's, Elrich Lowe's family or Stephen Kitzell's family, always go to a non-sports doctor who's not wrapped up into being part of the team, and just get your real advice, because you want to be a father, brother, son, man, walking around, and don't play around with the head. Don't play around with the spine of the head. Everything else, I get it. You have to have high performance, so you need to get people back. You will do things that are painful if you're in elite sport that you probably wouldn't do if you were just an accountant. But Ibn's been such an amazing servant at every place he's ever been. I just hope that he's getting ultra conservative, cautious advice about his head. But that's all I'm saying is the news out of the Sharks was that he got through that. He was ready for contact.
Yeah, well, we'll see. Time will tell. Okay, Harry, thanks. I'm looking forward to the first Southern Zebras taking on the British Lions. Hopefully the Zebras Lions thing is not an indicator how that's going to go, because a zebra doesn't stand a chance against a lion in nature, but we'll see. Thanks, man. I enjoyed that. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Cheers.
It's the Lekker Rugby Pod, only on Megaphone Rugby.